Buenos dias. A moment ago, we were singing that song, and Judah was sitting on my lap. And, just a sentence into the song, Judah was going like this. And then he went, and I'd said, okay, if you think my breath stinks, you can get down. And he said, I want to get down. And then he wandered over. So now I'm all self-conscious getting up here. That was the greatest blessing. I hated everything about wearing a mask everywhere I went, but that was a good thing. Close talkers. That was one of the benefits of close talkers. It kind of created a barrier, at least as far as that goes. So anyways, that has nothing to do with the sermon, but I felt that needed to be shared. And on another note, the other night, I don't know, I know there were a lot that were here, but that was such an encouraging time. Just being together, that is what the church is. It is not just a group of people that come for an hour on Sunday to sing and do a sermon. Being the church is so much more than that. And so I'm really excited. We made an announcement on Wednesday night about beginning koinonia again. Koinonia is just the Greek word for fellowship. Anytime you read fellowship in the New Testament, that's the word that's being used. And so we're doing that again. And the first one is going to be November. It's either the 14th or 15th, but it's the second Sunday in November. It's going to be the second Sunday of every month. Not to say that hosts can't do it more frequently than that. That's going to be up to hosts, but we will have a designated Sunday evening every month, starting the second Sunday of this next month, just to do that. Those are the kinds of things, when you look around, that makes you to feel very confident about the future of this church. And there were kids running everywhere and a lot of young blood, and it was just very inspiring. So I appreciate everybody that came to that and just had a good time sitting around a fire, and God gave us some really good weather. Couldn't have asked for better weather. And let's get into the text this morning. I want you to go to Romans chapter 6. It's been a while since we've been in Romans. It seems like it's been a while since I've preached. But it's been a hectic past few months between the Bear Valley lectures and then having Eric Lyons here and then me being in California to speak last week. And so I'm just glad to settle down. That's it for a long while. This is my home, and I love this church. I love being here, and it's fun to go and talk to other people, but this is where I'm sticking my feet on the ground, and I'm just really glad to be back. And it's been a little while since we've been in Romans, so let me just give you a quick refresher. First, let's read the text, and then I'll tell you why Paul's saying what he's saying. But Romans 6, starting in verse 12, he says, "Therefore, do not let sin rule in your mortal bodies for you to obey its passions. And also, don't present your members to sin as instruments of unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as living from the dead, and present your members to God as instruments of righteousness. For sin will not rule you, since you are not under law, but under grace." That's my translation of those verses. And in this section, it really breaks down very simply. Paul says, here are two things you don't do, and here are two things that you do. Don't do these two things, but do these two things. Namely, do not let sin rule in your mortal body. Do not present your members to sin as tools of unrighteousness. Do present yourselves before God as living from the dead, and do present your members to God as instruments of righteousness. – That will be the outline for the next couple of weeks. We will not do all of those this morning. We're just going to look at the first one. But why is it that Paul is having to tell a bunch of Christians what he says, that first thing that he says don't do? I mean, you always are told when you're speaking or preaching or whatever, consider your audience. To whom are you speaking? If I'm talking to a non-Christian, I will not speak the same way as to you. I'm going to present that message from a totally different angle. But why is he telling a bunch of Christians, do not let sin be the ruler of your physical body? Why is he having to say that? Well, this whole section, chapter 6, verses 1 through 14, was rooted in a question Paul anticipated that they would ask based on something very profound he said at the end of chapter 5. At the end of chapter 5, he said, the law came in order to increase the sin problem, in order to increase the trespass. Then he said, but where sin increased, grace abounded all the more. So the whole point was, you can't hold God as unjust for giving us something that he knew would exacerbate sin. Because what God did when he gave the thing that exacerbated sin is that God elevated his grace to match it. See, when there's less law, there's less sin. When there's more laws, there's more sins. So when God gave more laws, there were 600 something of them, people sinned more. And he said, but where sin increased, grace abounded all the more, which prompted this question. It's a natural question. Should we continue in sin so that grace may abound? Because the idea is grace is a good thing. And therefore, more grace is better than less grace. And if sinning more is the key to more grace, then maybe we ought to sin more so that we get more grace. And Paul forms two big arguments in chapter 6. The first one, verses 1 through 14. The second one, verses 15 through the end of the chapter. Both arguments answering that question from a different angle of why we should not keep on sinning. But the first one, do you remember the basis of why we do not keep on sinning? He said it, how can we who died to sin still live in it? The argument wasn't that the grace of God is somehow insufficient or that the grace of God has a limit put on it. The reason why we do not keep on sinning has nothing to do with the fact that God's grace it has nothing to do with how much grace God has, but it has to do with you died to sin. You died to it. You can't keep living in a thing that you died to. Well, how did you die to it? Remember, he said you were baptized into Christ. You were baptized into his death. And what was Christ's death? He said the death Jesus died, he died to sin. And you being brought into that baptism, being joined with Christ in his death, now you're dead to sin. Not because you had the willpower or the ability or the strength within yourself to die to sin. You didn't. But Jesus already did it, and you were just joined with him. That's what it's all about. So he said there, when you were baptized, you died, and therefore you cannot keep on doing this. So verses 12 through 14, this is the application of what he'd been saying before. He built this big argument of why we died to sin and how we died to sin. And then he says, therefore, let me give you some instructions. Don't do this, don't do this, do this, and do this. And this morning, again, we're just looking at that first one. Let's break that open a little bit, because I imagine there's a lot of questions that come with it. Do not let sin rule in your mortal body. Do not let sin be the master of your physical body, this vessel that you carry every day. Do not let sin be the thing that tells it what to do. So, two questions of that, and that's what we're going to look at this morning. Two questions about that command. Number one, which will be a very simple answer, What does it mean? What would it be? What would it look like for sin to rule your mortal body? What would it look like to have sin as the master of your flesh? And then second, how do you not do that? Because he says don't do it. So I want to answer both of those. The first one is the simplest, because he tells us right away. If you look in verse 12, he says, do not let sin rule in your mortal bodies. And then how does he finish that sentence? For you to obey its passions. It's the most basic breakdown of what it would mean to have sin as the ruler of the body, is that you obey sin rather than God. Now, I think it's important that, and I will not get technical here at all because you just have to trust me on this. The way that the Greek is structured, he's saying for you to obey its passions. Which passions? The passions of sin or the passions of the body? Well, the way that it's structured is he's talking about the passions of the body. And sin is this thing that comes in externally to that, to the passions. Your body, your physical body has desires. And those desires could be fulfilled in a billion ways. Some of them may be very good. Some of them might be very bad. But sin comes, that's what the devil does. He comes over your body that has natural desires. And what sin does is it tries to steer your body in a direction to fulfill the natural desire in a way God has forbidden. That's what sin is. So he says you are mastered by sin when sin comes over your body with all of its passions, and it gets you to obey it. It comes knocking on your door and it says, I want you to go do this. But you know God said don't do that. And still you walk out the door and you go and you do it. What does it look like to have sin be the master or the ruler of the body? It doesn't mean that you're perfect, because we know that, he's going to get to an argument in the next chapter where he says, I don't do the things I do want to do, and I do the things that I don't want to do. So what's he saying? It doesn't mean perfect. So we will not, none of us will be perfect until that day, so it doesn't mean that you are just going to completely eliminate sin from your life. But what does it mean for it to be master? Is there a sin that you never defeat in battle? Now, you might have a sin, a particular sin that is a struggle for you, and when it comes knocking, no matter what, your answer is always yes. Now, you might feel badly after the fact. There might be guilt after the fact. You might say, boy, I wish I would not keep on doing whatever that one thing is. You might feel badly, but when the hour of battle comes and that enemy from the outside comes on your body that's supposed to be endowed by the Spirit of God and the strength he supplies, and it says, I want you to do this, do you always say, okay, and just go do whatever that is? That's what it means to have sin ruling the body. Do you never take the way of escape that God has promised? God has said, has he not? God is faithful. There is no temptation that you cannot withstand. God will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But along with a temptation, God has always provided a way of escape. There is always a way out the back door. When sin comes knocking, do you go with it through the front door every time? Or do you say, no, yes, I would like to do that, but no, there's a back door. I'm going to take this route. And then you get out of there like Joseph with Potiphar. That's what it would be to be ruled by sin, is when the temptation comes, you just do it. We've got to be winning battles. And there is a way to do that. And again, we're going to look at that now. How do I make sin no longer my master? Is there a more central question to people who are trying to live out this Christian faith in a successful way? How do I do that? He says don't do it. I get that. And I think sometimes we just stop there. This is the weakness in topical preaching. The weakness in topical preaching is that you never get to the how. You're stuck on rules in terms of don't do that, because it said don't do it. But you just stop there. Now, if all I did was bounced around from one text to the next through the Bible, and I came to Romans 6, 12 through 14, and I presented a sermon, and I said, now I'm going to give you 2 things you shouldn't do and 2 things you should do, and leave you on your way, that's fine and dandy, but you may not have any practical way of knowing where's the rubber meet the road on that. And that's why expository, we've been in this for a year. This is the 48th sermon. My head has been in this, and Paul has laid a highway of truth concerning how do you apply that? How do I not let sin rule in my mortal body? Because he says don't do it, but he's given clues as to how, and he's going to give something very express in just a moment. But there's 2 truths it's actually just 2 sides of the same coin for how you don't let sin rule your mortal body. 2 sides to the same coin. And the first one, here's a hint for you. What was it that promoted sin and made for it to be an even bigger problem than what it was before, according to Romans chapter 5? It came from God. Moses gave it on tablets. Law. Law as your system of justification before God exacerbated the sin problem. If the way you are to be justified before God is by perfectly keeping law, then you will never measure up. You will just be as sinful as can be. Let me prove to you that with 5 verses. 1 Corinthians 15:56. The power of sin is the law. Do you remember that? Have you ever thought about that? The power of sin, the thing that it can wield in your direction to make you just keep on doing that, is to give you a series of law. Romans 4:15. The law brings wrath, but where there is no law, there is no transgression. Romans 5:20. Now the law came in order to increase the trespass. Romans 7:5. For while we were living in the flesh, our sinful passions aroused by the law were at work in our members to bear fruit for death. Romans 7:8, he gets very specific. But sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment of God, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. For apart from the law, sin lies dead. So he's made this a big point to say that if your means to salvation is being under a system of law, and by that system you'll be justified, he says that's what actually makes your sin problem even worse. At the end of chapter 5, the law came in order to increase the trespass. So if you're saying, how do I overcome sin? The first clue is do not let the root of your Christianity be a system of rules and laws and tick marks and checked boxes. When you hear that, I would imagine that there are people who would say, well, then you're saying we shouldn't have rules or anything like that. By no means. God has the highest standard for your life than any other thing that you could be doing on this earth. The standard of God is supremely high. But the means to attaining it, we go at it backwards. And the question is, what is the root? What is at the center of what you call Christianity? If the very central place in your heart is just a list of rules, that will not be enough to defeat sin. The reason is because rules for rules' sake is not enough power when temptation comes knocking. Temptation is knocking on your door and saying, hey, I want you to come do this. And you say, well, I can't. There's a rule that says I shouldn't do it. The temptation is going to say, so what? Who's to say you can't break the rule? And you might have in your life people, and there are reasons for rules that we form. And a lot of times they're not good reasons. A child might be 17, 18, whatever, and the reason why he is quote unquote being a Christian is because his mom and dad expect it of him. Is that a good enough reason? It's a rule, but is it going to be enough when he leaves the home? No, it will not be. There are people and Christians that live by certain rules and certain standards because society expects it, or because their circle that they're around expects it. But what about when they're not in that circle? What about when society lowers its standards? Are we not living in a time right now where society has dropped its standards and you're now seeing so many Christians that are just simply following along? Because why? What is the basis? What is the center of what you call Christianity? If it's just rules, that will not be enough when temptation comes knocking. What has Paul been saying from the beginning of this letter is the means to our justification before Almighty God? Has he not said that it is a faith like that of Abraham that gives God the glory, that is seeking after the promises, that doesn't just believe in God, but that believes God, one that believes that the way of God, despite every other alternative, is always the better? Is that not what he's been saying? What if you, in your inner person, had a true devotion, a pure devotion to the Creator of the universe, and in that deepest place in your heart, when temptation comes, you say, Jesus, my Savior, my Master, my ruler, my Lord, my best friend, my God, the one who literally died for me. He hung on a cross for me. Though being an enemy, while being an enemy, he died for me. And I have come to know him, and he has stood by me in everything I have ever done. I have not been a place where he has not been there with me. Others have failed me. He has not failed me yet. He has been good to me when I was not good to him. And I have grown to love him. I've grown to adore him. I have grown to find Jesus to be the greatest and most faithful friend in all the world. And so I will come to the garden alone and talk with him and walk with him when nobody else is there. He has been faithful. How then, temptation? You're trying to tell me to go out there, but I have a history with you. I know you promise pleasure, but you've only always brought pain. And I know that to be true. How many times have we proved that to be true? Temptation, you've lied to me. But the Lord Jesus promised me pleasure, and he gave me a joy that is so deep, it is incomparable to anything else in all the universe. When that's the center of your faith, temptation comes knocking on your door, you are not going to go out that door. It isn't to say you will not stumble, because you will. But it is to say you will be winning battles. It will come, and by and large, you'll say, no. I stand with the Lord and he's my Savior. What if that's the center? A faith in Jesus, a faith in God. That's the first way of how we overcome this. It isn't by creating more rules. Now, here's the other truth. Here's the other side to the same coin. First of all, look at verse 12, because this is very connected. Verses 12 and verse 14. Verse 14 gives the answer most directly to verse 12. But he says in verse 12, do not let sin rule in your mortal bodies. And then notice what he says in verse 14. For sin will not rule you, since you are not under law, but under grace. Now, we just talked about the first part, didn't we? If your means to being justified before God is law, then that's not going to work. It just makes us to approach God solely on the basis of rules, and it will not work. But Paul says the reason why sin will not rule you is because you're not under law, but what? You're under grace. So that is a question that you've got to ask. How does that work? And how is it that being under grace serves as a power to overcome the master called sin? How does that work? This, by the way, this is the opposite of what people had twisted it to be, didn't they? We should continue sinning so that more grace will come. And Paul's argument is actually to be, when you're under grace, it brings sin totally away. That's amazing. Grace is one of those things that initially forgives sin. But the greatest grace is that it makes you to no longer want to sin. That's the end goal. How does that do that? Now, this idea is strengthened by what Paul said in chapter 2. Do you remember? He said, do you presume on the riches of his kindness and forbearance and patience, not knowing that God's kindness is meant to lead you to repentance? He said, do you presume on it? Do you think because God's grace exists, then therefore I can do whatever I want? He says, no, the grace of God is meant to bring you to repentance. This is the same thing he's saying here, isn't it? Sin will not be your master because you're under the grace of God. How does that work, church? Well, here's how it works. Sin only has power over you when it can say, I am the final decisive word over your life. You sinned. And on that basis, you stand condemned before God. Sin wants to keep you in a constant state of guilt. Sin wants for you to constantly feel ineligible for grace. And when you go into that state of guilt and feeling distant from God and ineligible from his grace, it's only bringing you further and further and further from the source of your strength. Sin will say, you're going to die for that sin, but you still have some life left. You might as well live it up. Even though you're condemned before God, you can come with me. I know you were miserable before and you weren't able to do what all those things your body wanted to do, but you come with me and I'll let you have all of that. And this is going to be the best way. You might say, far-fetched. No, that's not the way it works. Why do you think that the demons in Matthew 8:29, listen to what they said. Jesus came and they knew him. They knew Jesus. They knew that he was the master. They knew he was the Lord of the universe. They said, what have you to do with us, O Son of God? They knew he was the Son of God. And they said, have you come to torment us before the time? They were getting every last morsel of pleasure that they could by bringing pain to this fella in the caves, even though they knew they were condemned. They knew that a time was coming where they would be tormented. But when they're in that state where they know condemnation is reality, it just brings them to keep on doing it. You will sometimes meet somebody who'll say, I've done too many things to be pardoned. They might even say, I do believe in God. I do believe in Jesus. But I've simply done too much. We got to be there when those people meet that place and tell them, nope, that isn't true. That isn't the way that it works. God saves us while we are enemies. He doesn't save us once we've gone 90% of the way and become mostly good and then finishes the journey for us. No, while you were yet enemies, God gave his son for you. Isn't that one of the deepest truths we've looked at in this book so far? Rarely will somebody die for a righteous person or a good person, but God gave his son for us in that while we were still enemies, while we were still sinners, while we were pushing against him, he died for us. And if he will die for us, how much more will he live for us once we've been brought into his presence? One of my favorite truths that we've brought out in this book so far. But Paul is saying grace is that power because sin tries to keep you ineligible for grace. But the problem is, now this is the lie that most people don't understand. The only time sin has power over your life is when God's system of your justification is law. If the system of justification for you is law, then if you break it, you deserve death. And on that basis, sin will say you're going to die, or you're not good enough, or you never will be, or whatever. But what about when God says, law is not my system for your justification? In fact, my system of your justification has built into it the reality that you will never be good enough. It has built into it your sin already. And you will be justified not on the basis of your righteousness, but you will be justified on the basis of my righteousness, says God. That righteousness being something that comes through Jesus the Christ, who he in his body died to sin. He mastered the flesh and never once said yes to sin. He went to the cross and through death remained obedient through all of it. Sin never had sway, never had hold, never had anything over him, despite the temptation and the lures that were brought. Jesus died to sin. You get joined into Jesus, and you are dead to sin. And now you're under the grace of God. And you, I promise, having come from a point where my Christianity was mostly rules, and now at a point where I think of them very little, you will be better at keeping rules when they aren't the center than you are when that's the way you approach the faith. Make God your center. Make Christ your center. Believe in him with all of your heart. Devote yourself to him. Go to him humbly. Love him. Be his friend as he has been yours. Learn to be devoted to him in the purest way. And when you become that, the fruit is always these things that the Bible says don't do and do. The fruit is, sin, you're no longer my master. God is my master. I'm under grace. You will not answer to sin anymore. So do not let sin rule in your body. How do you do that? Make the center of your faith in God. Make the center of your Christianity, faith and not rules. And then the rules will follow when you've made faith the center. And train your brain to accept the grace of God for your life, which is so good. It's so big that no matter how high you've sinned, it will cover it. There is nothing it will not cover. That's really what Jesus does, is he covers up our sin. And the devil will bring you in your life to try and cover your sin in a million of different ways, and none of them will work. All of them will be fig leaves on a naked body. But God will come with an animal carcass initially, if you were a Jew, and he'll put that over your body and the blood will cleanse you. Or he'll come much later with Jesus and he will cover you with him, and those sins will be gone. Live in that grace, and you will have a purer Christianity than you ever could otherwise. Let's stand and sing.